Hello. Very excited to be once again sharing some words of Torah through the miracle of the interwebs here. When Yaakov is on his way back from Haran, where he has been living with his uncle and his uncle and father-in-law Lavan, he sends a message to his estranged brother Esav. He sends messengers to his brother and instructs them to say, "Thus says your servant Yaakov, I dwelt, Garti, with Lavan and remained until now," and instructs them to go on to say, "I've acquired cattle, donkeys, sheep, male and female slaves, and I send this message to my Lord in the hopes of gaining your favor." And it's curious that the very first thing that Yaakov would instruct the messengers to say to his brother is, "I have dwelt with Lavan and remained until now." Haran, where Lavan lives, and the land of Canaan are not very far apart. The two communities were bound by family ties. These are cousins and uncles and siblings several times over. So presumably there's communication between these two communities. And even if Yaakov never had sent a direct message to his family, they would have at least been aware of his whereabouts through the way news traveled in those days. So why does he bother saying, I've dwelt with Lavan until now? Rashi offers two explanations. The medieval French commentator on the Torah par excellence, he says the first explanation that Rashi gives is that when Yaakov says, Garti, I dwelt, he's emphasizing that he merely dwelt there temporarily, as a sojourner, a temporary resident, and never settled there permanently. The Hebrew word garti, I dwelt, implies a temporary kind of dwelling, not a permanent settling. Alternatively, Rashi offers another explanation focused on this word garti, which he points out is numerologically equivalent to the number 613, the proverbial number of commandments in the Torah. And although the Torah is not yet to be given for several centuries, Yaakov is saying to his brother, though I have sojourned with Lavan the wicked, this is Rashi's language, I have observed the 613 commandments. V'lo lamadti asav hara'im. I have not learned from his evil ways. Now, Rashi's second explanation raises questions of its own. For one, once Yaakov's telling Esau that he kept 613 commandments, why does he have to go on and say, and I have not learned from Lavan's evil ways? Obviously, had he learned from Lavan's evil ways and adopted his ethics and his idolatrous religion, he could no longer say, I've kept the 613 commandments. The Vizhnitzer Rebbe suggests that we read Rashi's statement slightly differently. When he says, V'lo lamadti mimasav hara'im, he's not saying, I have not learned from his evil ways. Rather, he's saying, I have learned no. The word no, I learned from his evil ways. In other words, Yaakov's decades-long sojourn with the evil-doing Lavan taught him how to say no. For some people, no is the hardest word in the English language. There's so many of us who, generally speaking, try to be honest people. We don't lie in the course of our day, generally speaking, but when we're asked to do a favor we really don't want to do, or participate in a social event we really don't want to be part of, we don't hesitate to make up all kinds of lies as an excuse to not participate. And if we can't think of a good excuse, we can't make up a good enough lie not to go, we do the thing that we're being asked to do that we don't want to do, because of however badly we don't want to do it, we want even less to say no. There's very little unpleasant in the world that's unpleasant enough that it'll induce me to say no. Right? Saying no in and of itself is far more unpleasant than all kinds of unpleasant social activities or obligations. And so, in our work lives, with our families, with our spouses, with our children and parents, we wind up doing things that we really don't want to do, or resorting to lie, what we tell ourselves are white lies, in order to avoid having to say no. And we do this because we say we don't want to hurt other people's feelings. We do this because we're maybe afraid of awkwardness. And above all, I think we do this because we don't want to disappoint people. We want to be liked. We want people to appreciate us and think well of us. And we're afraid to stand up for ourselves because of what the other person might think of us. But the truth is, in the long run, an honest no causes less pain than a dishonest excuse, which can set up false expectations that maybe the next time the answer will be different, or might even cause more hurt feelings when the lie is discovered. And so Yaakov was not unique in having trouble with the word no, as so many of us do. But somewhere in the course of his years with the untrustworthy, idol-worshipping Lavan, Yaakov learned to say no for the sake of his own self-preservation. He couldn't have survived, much less emerged spiritually and morally intact after 20 years working for Lavan the deceiver, had he not learned how to say no. But it's still curious why this should be, according to the Vayishlach Rebbe, the first thing that Yaakov says to his brother Esav upon returning from Lavan's household. Why should this thing that I got pretty good at saying no, be the first thing he tells his brother? But it makes a lot of sense if we look at the events that led up to Yaakov's flight to Lavan in the first place. Yaakov left town because his brother Esav was in a murderous rage after Yaakov had dressed up as his brother in order to receive from his father, their father, Yitzchak, the blessing that was intended for Esav. But this wasn't some idea that Yaakov cooked up. He didn't do this because he wanted to. He did this at his mother Rivka's insistence. And even though Yaakov's own intuition told him it was a bad idea, as we can see, because when his mother tells him to do it, his first reaction is to say, but wait, what happens if Dad catches me and he's going to be upset? And it seems that he thought it was a bad idea, but rather than simply refusing to go along with it, he raised objections. And when Rivka disposes of his objections and says, don't worry about it, I've got a good disguise, and anyway, if your father gets mad and he curses you, the curse will be on me, rather than simply saying no, he goes along with her plan. If instead of making up an excuse, Yaakov had simply said, "No, Mom, I'm not going to do that." Much heartache and decades of exile could have been avoided. Similarly, after going along with his mother's plan and dressing up as Esav and going to his father, Yitzhak asked Yaakov, "Are you Esav, my son?" Yaakov had a perfect opportunity here to come clean, to admit who he was, and ask his father for forgiveness and for a blessing on his own terms, given freely and without coercion. All he had to do was, when his father said, "Are you Esav?" answer simply, "No." The theft of the blessing, which led to Esav's hatred of Yaakov, and then to Yaakov's exile to go live with Lavan, all came about because Yaakov couldn't say no at the appropriate time. Not once, but twice. And as a result, he fled. He had to flee his brother's violent anger and go to a place where he had no choice but to learn how to say no in order to survive. Thus, according to the Vishnitzer, Yaakov's message to Esav upon his return was not just a matter of informing Esav of his whereabouts, nor merely bragging about how he had kept the faith and stayed true to the ways of his parents and grandparents. He was letting Esav know that he had changed, that he had learned to say no, to set limits, and to adhere to principles of ethics and fair play, even under pressure to do otherwise. A person who can't say no is not only going to be taken advantage of by others, is not only going to wind up putting up with situations and agreeing to do things that are not in their best interest, but as the story of Yaakov demonstrates, a person who can't say no will wind up doing things that they know are not right, that are unfair and harmful to people around them. It's not easy to say no. It's much easier to just go along, to go with the flow, go along with what others want from us, and to go along with our own desires and impulses. Saying no requires, first of all, that we notice that feeling when we're being pressured, either externally or by our own yetzer hara, our own bad impulses, to do something that is against our interests or just isn't right. And then, once we've noticed that, that's the first step. Saying no requires us to have courage to say, "You know what? The person I'm talking to might not like it. I might like it myself, but I'm going to say no anyway and set a limit." And then, that's not enough. It takes discipline to stick to it. Because guess what? When we say no, other people don't just usually say, "Okay, fine, talk to you later." They insist, right? "You want another piece of pie?" "No, thank you." "Oh, come on, just one more piece of pie," right? That was the line in my house growing up. If you said no to seconds or to thirds, you'd get offered again and again and again. And even when the person we're saying no to is ourselves, right? It's our own yetzer hara, our own desire. Desire doesn't take no for an answer very easily. It keeps coming back. You do want that piece of cake. You do want that piece of pie. So saying no is not easy, but it is something that gets easier the more we do it. It's a muscle we can strengthen by exercising it. And so I encourage you, if you're listening to this, to take the next week and just be on the lookout for those moments when you are offered something you don't want, or asked to do something you don't want to do, or when you find you do want something or want to do something that on a deep level you know is not for the best. And in those moments, to at least consider the possibility. If it seems too scary to actually say no, just ask yourself, what would actually happen if I said no? Probably the world is not going to fall apart, although it might feel like it will. And then once we're practiced at recognizing those moments, those points where we have that choice to say no or give in, then we can actually practice, okay, let's try it. Let's see what happens if I say no. And you might be surprised that the walls don't cave in. Lightning doesn't strike. The world doesn't fall apart. That's piece of homework number one. I've got another piece of homework for all of us. And that is this. To also notice those moments when other people are saying no to us. And to make the choice to support them by listening to them, by honoring their no. You know, when it might seem innocent enough when I offer someone a piece of pie and they say no, well, come on, have a piece of pie. What's the harm? But no, there is a harm. Because I'm making it that much harder for this person to practice exercising gvura, exercising restraint, and saying no. So when someone says no to something as simple or seemingly trivial as a piece of food, or an offer of help, or an invitation, let's take them at their word and not keep pressuring them to say yes and relent. After all, that's what we would hope for if we were in the one saying no. As Jews, we are the descendants of Yaakov, and we're called a holy nation, Am Kadosh. And according to the Ramban Nachmanides, being holy means separating ourselves, not only from activities and things which are prohibited by the Torah, but even refusing to indulge in acts which might be technically permissible, but are not advisable or not appropriate. In other words, being holy, kadosh, is all about having limits, about being able to say no. Before Yaakov could become Yisrael, he had to learn to be holy. He had to learn to hold his limits, to exercise gevurah, restraint, and to say lo, no. When we practice saying no to those who would take advantage of us, as well as to those who mean no harm, when we practice saying no to those who would encourage us to violate our principles in the name of getting along, when we say no, when we practice saying no to our own desires and impulses, when we know they're not appropriate, we are preparing ourselves and on our way to embodying the kedusha, the holiness that is our heritage as the heirs of Yaakov, who learned to say no. Shabbat Shalom.